So hello, my name is Jim Spates. I am a former professor of sociology at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. And in the last 3.5 years, I've been involved with a group of people who've been trying to save a wonderful building in downtown Geneva called the Dove Block. And we're a nonprofit group. We're made up of local citizens. And what we are trying to do is take a building that has essentially lain vacant for a dozen years, bring it back to life, have someone buy the building, and then fill it with tenants that will make that corner come alive again. The Dove Block is one of the great buildings of Geneva. It is on the corner of Exchange Street and Castle Street. And because of that, it is at the most important commercial intersection in the city. And I'm an urban sociologist, and one of the things that I've learned over the course of my time studying cities is that cities thrive when not only are their businesses open, but in their most important areas are the businesses open. And the Dove Block, our former city mayor used to call the Dove Block the corner of Main and Main. And it has been vacant for a dozen years. So we decided, it's a great old Victorian, high Victorian building, of which there are fewer and fewer all the time, not only in upstate New York, but the whole country. And we're trying to save it. And in order to do that, we have formed two separate groups. One is called the Dove Block Restoration Group. That group is charged with saving the building and is headed up by my partner in this process, Dave Bonnell, who's a local contractor, and the Arthur Dove Tribute Group, which is headed up by me. And it is a group of people who are dedicated to having a gallery dedicated in part to the great American artist Arthur Dove, in the building when it is ready to open again to various clients coming in, and which will honor Dove's memory as one of the most important artists of the 20th century in America, as he is recognized as being by everybody who knows much about modern art in American society. To this point, we have recently bought the building. Our group has bought the building. We own it, and we are now going to have it contracted by a local contractor whose job it will be to bring this vacant building back to full functioning status. We're going to need many things. We're going to need heating and water and electricity and all sorts of things that have gone south, so to speak, in the years since it has been abandoned. We're going to need to repair roofs and windows and whatever, but the idea is to have it open and functioning in the city again. We're all volunteers in this process. And so the building as you see it now, on the corner of Exchange and Castle Streets, is now all but ready to be redeveloped. And so what will happen throughout 2019 and a couple of years after that, is that it will be completely refurbished. Inside it'll become a new building. And so what we wanted to do and what this video is intended to do is to record a visual record of what the Dove Block looked like before it underwent reconstruction. Because, as I said, it's a very beautiful old building. It'll give you, on the one hand, a sense of what needs to be done to bring it back to life. On the other hand, it will provide a visual record, and this is very important, of the spaces that were used by Arthur Dove, who was the great modern American artist, that he used to create some of his greatest paintings when he lived in the Dove Block in the 1930s. So we want to have a record of that and what needs to be done. So we're going to begin by going inside. We'll first go into the space that the Arthur Dove Tribute Group has set aside. That will be the gallery to Dove and his works, and also for community art studies. And then we'll go into and do a tour of the whole building, so that if you follow this video to the end, you have a sense of what the Dove Block looked like at the end of 2018. It will be called the Dove Gallery, and it will be, in effect, the place where we will have our memorial area devoted to Dove, his work and his importance in Geneva. And then it will also be a community arts center where we will show the work of local artists. What we're looking at here is at least a portion of the original ceiling of the Dove block when it opened in the late 1870s. And as you can see, as you look along, much of almost all of that is now gone. But this was a wonderful commercial building when it was first opened. They had numbers of tenants. Over the years, they had close to 100 tenants, and upstairs there were apartments and other businesses. We're looking now at the south wall in the Dove Gallery, which of course will be one of the major display walls once we have it open as a functioning gallery. But the south wall is important in this building because on the third floor, as we know, Arthur Dove did so many of his paintings, had so many of his world-famous paintings there. In any event, we're going to do something with this part of the wall so that it will be a memorial to Dove and his work when he was in the building in the late 1930s painting. And then the rest of the gallery is really going to be a space devoted to local artists. Geneva does not have at this point anything that we would call a community arts gallery, and so one of the great visions, I think, of our program is to have a community arts gallery that will be of interest to not only people who are interested in the history of art, and in Arthur Dove particularly, but people who are interested in the arts and who love the arts. So that the idea is to take this space and convert it into this gallery, which will have, on the one hand, the memorial and story of Arthur Dove in Geneva, on the other hand, many of the local arts and changing programs as time goes on. So one of the things that's lovely and important about the Dove block is its recent history. The building came on the market by the city in 2006, and it was purchased by a British person by the name of Elizabeth Wenman, who had an idea that she would perhaps live upstairs and turn the rest of this building into a community arts center of some sort. And so actually in 2007 or 2008, surprisingly, the back wall, right behind me, actually collapsed into the small alleyway behind the building. And much to her credit and the city's benefit, she has repaired this back wall to absolutely top-notch standards, so it is now stable. And we have had a study done of the building by Barrow Architects in Rochester, and they have gone through the whole building with a fine-tooth comb. The short story is that they have said that the entire building is sound, so we will not have to do any major reconstruction of the edifice itself, and we're delighted by that. If we look at this wall, this wall is the north wall of this part of the building, and as we pan down to the left, which is to the west, we see that there is a wooden edifice constructed over a part of that wall. That, in fact, was a way to get into the other part of the first floor of the building. We do not imagine that will continue to be there when the gallery will close that up. And to the left of that, you see the opening down into the basement. There's a beautiful basement in this building that goes underneath the whole building that is dry, and we will be using that, the gallery will be using that as for storage and perhaps other purposes associated with having the gallery open itself. One of the wonderful things about our project to save the Dove block is that this is a glorious building. This is called the architecture of the building when it was built was called High Victorian Gothic, and there are fewer and fewer of these buildings in America as the years go on, the decades change. More and more of them are being demolished, being put up, being changed into modern buildings, etc. So we're losing our architectural history. And one of the best things about this project is that we're going to save this building. We're not going to redo the structure. We're not going to change it. It's not going to be modern in any particular sense. It's going to be the Dove block reopened. And I think there's a great value in that, to preserve our architectural history, particularly a building of this excellence as we go on with this project. One of the things that's nice about this facade is that if you look to this side over here, you see that the original building, that would have been all commercial, whatever the commercial ventures would have been. And then to my right, where the gallery is going to be, is where the would have been another commercial operation of some sort. And we have pictures showing over the years of different places occupying these spaces. But this right here is an entryway, stairway, leads immediately to a stairway that goes up to the second floor. Well planned, because it meant that anybody who was working or living on the second or third floors could enter from that direction and go up without disturbing whatever was going on in the commercial ventures. So this is the main entry to the building as it exists now and has historically. So let's have a walk inside. So this is the first floor of the Dove block. I want to show you this. This is an original poster from a show that was at the Houghton House Gallery in the latter part of 1981. The show was mounted by Hobart and William Smith professor John Loftus, who was deeply influenced by Dove in his own art, and one of the art professors at the time, professors of art history, Teddy Aiken, who is now a member of our Dove block board. But in any event, it was the first really public remembrance of Arthur Dove as an artist and a way to get people interested in his importance to the history of Geneva. He was kind of a forgotten member of Geneva for various complex reasons. But the point is that we're bringing him back, and the idea of the Arthur Dove part of our project is to tell people just how important Arthur Dove was as a major painter in the middle of in the sort of early decades of the 20th century in America. He's recognized by everybody in the art world as being of major significance to modernism. Over here we have just a small display of a number of Dove's paintings. We have a number of images of Arthur Dove at work in Geneva in the 1930s when he lived here with his wife Helen Red's Tor. And it's it's just nice for people to get a sense of that as they walk in. Over here are a couple of his pictures of the grain elevators in town. And he loved those, and here's a nice picture of the GLF grain elevator that was here when he was living there. And to the left, one of his drawings of it. He has a number of drawings of it, as we'll see. Over here, I love this picture. This picture is the Dove block I presume not terribly long after it was opened, and you get a nice picture of the facade itself. And there it was a saloon. And it was something Bartholomew Lager Beer. And those are presumably the owners of it. I like to think they're early images of myself and Dave Bonnell, who's my partner in saving the building. And then to the right, a number of local kids, and gives you a sense of what it was like back then. On this side, a bit further to the left, we see what was once an entryway when the restaurant was here, the restaurant that closed and made a building available for purchase. It would have been additional seating in the area that we're now reserving for the Arthur Dove Gallery. Here on my left, I guess, is what remains of the bar of the restaurant that closed. I think the restaurant closed maybe in 2004, 2005. And then the building was purchased by Elizabeth Wenman in 2006. And it is from whom that we're going to buy the building to finish the project of reconstruction. Moving on to this side, I have mentioned about what a wonderful building this is as a piece of architecture. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is this sort of arched window segment in the front, which gives the building a whole level of distinctiveness that it wouldn't have otherwise. I think that's great. We're going to keep that. There's another entryway there. There's another entryway behind me. And all of these are going to be preserved as we open the building again. The ceiling is terrific. I believe it's the original tin ceiling that we saw, that we can see. And it has been repainted and so on and saved. And I presume we will keep that. I certainly hope so. It's like the building itself. These tin ceilings are now an architectural treasure, and once they're gone, they're gone. the entire infrastructure is going to have to be redone. The heating, the electricity, everything. The whole system has to be changed. Much of it is extremely old. That's the first problem. The second is it all has to be brought up to contemporary code. So all of this will change as the reconstruction goes on. Here's another entry. I think this would have been one of the more common entries to go to the third floor, even though there is an access to the second floor. There was an awning out here. In fact, here's the awning right here on this side that used to be there. And again, obviously, it was a way to get into the building and to the various businesses and living quarters upstairs that without bothering the commercial activities downstairs. So this is an important stairwell that we're about to go up. It's the original, one of the original stairwells in the building itself. It's beautiful. It's older, meaning that it needs much repair. But we'd like to preserve it because this is the stairwell that people would take to the second floor, where many businesses were, and to the third floor where people lived much of the time, including Arthur Dove and his wife when they were living in Geneva. So I like to think of this as Arthur Dove's stairway. They would have been here right from late 1870s. You might want to take this because it begins to give you a sense of how much work needs to be done in the building. I'll walk you around the second floor. So the second floor is, as you'll see as we walk through, is a whole series of rooms, almost all of which I believe were used by different businesses. So we've had insurance firms in here, we've had the lawyers in here, we've had all sorts of different folks doing business in Geneva. The downstairs the first floor tended to be commercial. There was a donut shop, there was a place to get haircuts, there were those kinds of operations downstairs, retail. But upstairs was business offices, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily. So we'll do a walkthrough, and as we go, you'll see how much work needs to be done to bring this building back into fully functional status. But we are delighted because we're on the road to doing that. So this is a typical second floor room. It was an office space. We know that the last restaurant was here, that used this space for their own office. But as you look around, look at the walls and have a look at the ceilings as I speak, you'll see that this is in enormous need of repair, and this will all be redone. Again, we think basically the structure is sound. Whether all the rooms will remain as rooms or whether the walls will be broken down into bigger spaces is yet to be determined. But this is a pretty typical room. So you have to imagine that over the, let's say, 125 years until the building finally went vacant in the early 2000s, lots of different businesses here doing different kinds of work in Geneva. And many of them successful, many came and went, but it was a vital commercial corner, which is another point that I want to make. One of the things that makes the Dove Block project so important for what we call the Geneva Renaissance is that it is, without question, on the most important, the most trafficked intersection in the city. Businesses all around on all the different sides, and when you come into the city from the north, you come down Exchange Street. When you come into the city from the east, you bank off the lake and come up Castle Street, and the Dove Block is right on the corner. So to have a vibrant city, you need to have vibrant buildings, and you need to have vibrant buildings right in the places where people are most likely to be. This is one of those places. Location, location, location. This is the location. I gotta tell you, this place was such a mess when we first started this project. And over the years, the last 2 or 3 years that we've been cleaning up the place, Steve Schoblum Schoblum Photographers here in Geneva has been more or less the person in charge of this. He's done a marvelous job. Many times we used Hobart and William Smith students. They have a regular help the community day that they call Day of Service. We've used them to come in and clean up. And what you're seeing now is sort of the cleaned up shell, as opposed to the incredible mess that this place was when we first started the project. So that's the first major improvement, and we have Steve to thank for all of that. Okay, so this space it just gives you a sense of one of the places gives you a sense of what the building was like when we first took over the project. Danger, keep out. The reason, very obvious, as you walk above the sign and look down, the floor is obviously destroyed in many places. The ceiling is also destroyed, and the reason for that is that the roof was leaking for many years, and there was nobody was watching over the building, and so a great deal of damage was done. But all of this will be fixed in due course. So again, the building is structurally sound, but a lot of damage. Coming through here, more rooms to my left, more rooms to my right, also more businesses. Here's a lovely room that would have been great to have an office in, because it has three wonderful windows opening on the corner of Exchange and Castle Streets, and again, marvelously cleaned up from before. Now I'll show you this corner when we go there. All right, this is a great room, also fronting on the corner of Castle and Exchange. But one of the things I would like you to see in this room is right behind me, the wall and the floor. Now, what I want you to imagine is that when we first started this project, the wall was virtually, you could hardly see it because there was so much trash in here, and the remaining trash that you see on the floor, it was at least 10 or 15 times more in volume. And that'll give you an idea of how much progress we've made in cleaning up the building. These electrical wires, there were at least a dozen more of them. Of course, they all have to be replaced, but you know, but also, let's go back and imagine this as a real office space. Two wonderful windows overlooking Exchange Street and the corner of Exchange at Castle. This would have made a terrific office for people doing whatever kind of business. We know that State Farm Insurance was here on the second floor. I don't remember whether this was their actual office, but one of these offices was, and it would have just been a great place to work. The sun would have arched over this way, over in that direction to the west as the day went on. The light would have been beautiful in here. And you'll get a sense of that when we go upstairs to the third floor. So this is a lovely second floor room. It's a good size, as you can see, and this would have been another office space. And if we look to the east, which is in that direction, the sun would have risen directly in front of those windows. You would have had great light in here and enough space to move around. There's a closet room immediately to the right on the other side of the windows. So you can see that William Dove's vision of having a building devoted to retail, first floor, commerce, second floor, housing, third floor, was a really smart way to put a major building downtown. And he was also very, very prescient. He understood the importance of location, which is why he bought this particular spot at the corner of Exchange and Castle Streets, because he knew it was going to be the most important corner in the city. And once this building is functioning again, it is going to be the most important corner in the city once again. So we've now had sort of an overview of the second floor. It's a great floor. It's going to be wonderful when it's redone. But it is not the pièce de résistance of this building. Now we go to the third floor, which is everything before this has been appetizer. Wait till we see the third floor. as you'll see, two stairways going up. This is the one to the south, and is again the original stairway. And this is the floor that Arthur Dove and his wife, Helen, also an artist by the way, lived on for a year and a half in the 1930s and created some of the greatest American art ever. Here. What a space. That response is what everybody has. People come onto this floor for the first time and they just say, oh, wow. This is a glorious space. And this is where Arthur Dove and Reds, she always called herself Reds, lived, and I'll walk you around the room and tell you why it is so important, both to the history of the Dove block, to the history of Geneva, and to the history of American art. If you're an artist and you're looking for studio space and you have no money in the Great Depression, as Dove had no money in the Great Depression, and this building is available to you and this floor is available to you, it is like a gift from the heavens. Because here you have a great space with incredible windows and terrific light all day long that the sun is up where you can do your work. And this is a very, very special place in the history of both the city and American art. Here we are on the third floor. It is a marvelous piece of architecture, extremely well planned, sort of the ultimate of the building itself, enormously high walls, and immediately behind me is a small apartment complex, which will almost certainly be destroyed when the third floor is rebuilt as part of the whole project of reclaiming the building itself. But the reason that it's important to have a good look at this apartment complex, or I shouldn't say complex, but space, is because this is where Arthur Dove and his wife Reds lived when he was living and working and painting in the Dove block. So this is a special place. We would love to preserve this space as part of our project, but we don't think it's going to be possible because one of the things that we absolutely must have in a modern building, even a rebuilt one, is a functioning elevator. And this corner, which is the northeast corner of the building, is probably the best place to put one in. There'd be access from the street downstairs. So let me walk you through what's left here. Inside we have, gosh, what an important improvement these guys have made in here. Inside we have a bathtub. I don't think this was the original space for the bathtub. This is Arthur Dove's bathtub, by the way. And George O'Keeffe's bathtub, because she visited him in Reds a number of times. They were very dear friends. So they the bathroom would have been in here, the tub would have been there. It's one of the old original cast iron bathtubs. So the sink is in there. And this was probably the dining room, and immediately next door, a small kitchen. So you're coming along here. So this would have been a kitchen, small dining room, a small place. We don't know quite where a stove would have been. It might have been on this wall behind me. Probably it was. The stove was here. And this would have been a pantry for the storage of various things. Very small apartment. Not a lot of room for dancing. So let me walk you outside. As you may have noticed, when you look at the image of the apartment from the other view, that there's an upstairs. There is an upstairs, but there's no stairway to it. And so, that's where they slept. And so here, it's been removed for the moment, but here there was a ladder. And they would climb up the ladder to the upper floor where their bedroom was. And also on that floor, on the second floor, the bathroom floor, the bedroom floor, there is an access to the roof where you would climb up to the roof. And we're quite convinced that Dove did a number of his important paintings of Geneva when he was in Geneva on that roof, because there are identifiable spaces around the city and around the immediate, the lake immediately to our east here that are identifiable. It had to be done in the Dove Lawn, either from this floor and the windows that you're looking at right now, or from the roof itself where you can see the new Ramada in the background. That certainly would not have been here. So we're now walking over to the north wall of the Dove Lawn. And there's something special I wanted to show you. As we get close and you have a look out the windows, you can see what a beautiful streetscape and the views that you would have. So here's another wonderful example. Dove did a lot of watercolors of Geneva. Geneva was a great inspiration for him. He would walk around the city. He would sometimes walk hours a day, taking a sketchbook with him, sketching out images of the city that would later turn into paintings or abstractions in various of his paintings. He would probably almost never draw the exact church or the exact building as it looked to the naked eye. He would get an impression of it, and then the impression would become part of another painting. There's one that's called Flour Mill 3. And you can see all these Geneva images in it if you know Geneva. But what's wonderful about it is that he's abstracted them out. It's one of the most famous Arthur Dove paintings. So anyway, here again we have on the left we have a wonderful picture of Geneva as it looked in Dove's time when he was living here. And on the right, we have one of the watercolors that he did. So this is a good historical record of how much he used this city as his inspiration during the time that he was painting. A lot of people think that abstract painting just kind of comes out of people's heads, the abstract painters' heads. Not so. Almost all of them. Dove is a prime example of this. He uses the real world, or what he would call nature, the natural setting, as his inspiration for thinking about a more abstract image. Always thinking about, when he does an abstract image, of giving a sense of what the essential element of that image is. And that's one of the key things about abstract painting. Some people say they can't understand it. Well, it's pretty understandable if you give it a little bit of time, because what these things are is that you find the essence of a thing and you paint that image. So for example, if you take a person, right? I look at you, you look at me, you see this, you see that, and that's it. But the person is much more than that, a particular direct view you have of them. The person is a personality, the person has an essence, the person has a spirit. And abstract painters are really trying to paint the spirit of things, the essential core elements of something. And Dove was a master at this. In fact, he was one of the first masters of this. He is known as the first abstract painter in America. Here's another example. There's a watercolor image right here next to me, which is called Exchange Street Number 1. Again, you can see that it's done from a height. It is more than likely done from this particular view right up here on the third floor of the Dove Lawn. And it looks out on the streetscape. And Dove it's beautiful in watercolor. There'll be an image of it which we'll show soon. But again, the idea is to show you how much Dove used the local environment as a stimulus for his work. Over here, we don't have an image right yet, but we should. There is a wonderful painting that Dove did called Geneva Sleet Storm. And that was the title of the painting. It hangs in the Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester. It's a beautiful painting, one of his abstractions. And he was right here, look at this particular spot, and he was looking down on the street, which had parallel parking at the time. No, sorry, had angled parking at the time. And he looks down and he sees these cars, and the sleet storm is coming, and he paints an image of them. And if you look at the painting, and you look at the space, and you've been in a sleet storm or a snowstorm, you have a sense that he's gotten the essence of what that is all about. And it's great because it was done here. He's looking down right at the street. When Dove lived here, late 1930s, no air conditioning, pretty hot. So I think we have a good sense that they lived with things on that wall, as I'll show you in a moment. that they lived out here because there was more air and they could open the windows and they'd have more air. And you see a bathtub here on this side. And the bathtub, there was another bathroom right here, and that, we have to also think that that was Arthur Dove's bathtub, and George Oakey's bathtub at one point in time. So no, very little heat in the winter, very hard space to heat because it's so huge, and certainly no air conditioning in the summer. So we're now looking at the south wall of the third floor. When Dove first came to this part of the building, remember we have to go back, it's the late 1930s, the Depression is still on. Dove has no money. This is part of the family estate, but the building, if anything, has maybe 2 or 3 tenants downstairs. It's not turning any money. Third floor is completely vacant. He comes up to this floor, he looks around, and he says, as everybody does when they walk up to this floor, wow, this is incredible. And he talks about the light. One of his dear friends was the American photographer Alfred Stieglitz. Stieglitz was a great photographer in his own right, but he is probably the single most important person in the history of the beginning of American modern art, because he knew Dove and he knew many other painters in the same tradition, and he would then display their works in his gallery in New York. And so Stieglitz is a really important figure in the Arthur Dove story. In any event, there are a whole series of letters now collected in a book between Dove and Stieglitz, and in one of them Dove says to Stieglitz, he says, I found this floor in the Dove block itself, and you cannot believe how glorious the light is. It is a godsend for a painter of my sort. So immediately behind me you see what we call Arthur's Wall. It's a white wall, and you can see that it's wainscoting on the bottom, and the white wall stretches all the way down on the south side of the building. And it is on this wall that Arthur hung his paintings as he worked on them. So you have to imagine this wall, as I will show you in a moment, full of Arthur Dove's most famous paintings that are now in galleries and the most prized possessions of many art galleries in the United States. We're going to try to preserve this section of the wall, maybe the part of that section as well, and we'll have it on display downstairs in the gallery. All right, so a moment ago we had a close-up of Arthur's Wall where I said he hung all his paintings when he was working on them in the late 1930s when he and Reds lived here. But this photograph, just over here to my left, is a wonderful image, a historical record. This is an incredible historical record for American art, because it shows you not only that he did hang his paintings on this wall, but many of those paintings, not quite all of them yet, but many of those paintings are now identifiable. I know what they are. We'll show you pictures of them in a moment. And they all hang in major American museums and have for years, and are the most prized possessions of so many of those museums. And I'll talk about those in a moment. But it gives you a sense of what the space was like. There was nobody else living here, just Dove and Reds and their friends would come up to visit them and so on. You see that it's also, if you look below the paintings, it's a bit of a living space. In the late 1930s, there would have been no air conditioning. And even if there had been, Dove couldn't have afforded it because they had no money. So they in the summer, I'm quite sure that they lived out here. As you can see, there's a sofa in the center of the painting, and to the right there's a bed. So this was also a living space in the building itself. But here you have a true record of the third floor as one of the most important spaces in American modern art. It's just a terrific, terrific photograph, and we're so delighted that we have it. Above us is the original ceiling, or what's left of it. You can see all the damage that's been done over the years from the leakage on the roof. But one of the things that's wonderful about this roof is that, again, it's an original. You see around the building, around the ceiling in various places, you see the outlets for what it would have been at first. Probably gas chandeliers, gas flame chandeliers, later would have been converted into electricity. And I suspect that most of this will go because it's just that probably wouldn't be of use in a modern apartment. If you look at one of these outlets up here and go immediately across the line that would have carried the gas or the electricity, you see a little bit of original stenciling, which is nice. So we've talked a little bit about how important this room was for Dove when he lived here and doing his art. I want you to get a sense as we pan around the room of how this room must have looked during Dove's time. We have the one image that shows about a dozen or 15 of his paintings hanging at the time. But in fact, the entire room was hung with Arthur Dove's paintings. So if we go around the room in this direction, and you see the white boards where the paintings hung and underneath it the wainscoting, and we rotate around the room all the way, we see that the same motif, the same structural motif is continued around the room. More white boards, and beneath them more wainscoting, all around the room. So what we have to imagine, which we believe is true, is that Dove hung paintings on every wall. So that in 1938, the beginning of 1938, when after they had been here a number of months, you have to imagine this entire space hanging with some of the greatest paintings ever done by an American artist. It's just a terrific image. There's one more part of the story that's worth telling, and that is, and it may be apocryphal, we don't know, but the story was that at one time, the third floor of the Dove block, not hard to imagine given the size of the space, was a roller skating rink. And they had a parquet floor, and people would come up here on a Friday night or whenever to roller skate. Well, when Dove lived here, the roller skating rink was gone, but the floor was still here. In fact, the floor that we're looking at is probably what remains of that floor. But the story that we have is that there were so many paintings hanging on this wall that Dove used to have a pair of roller skates. And he would put them on any given day and roller skate around the room working on different paintings as he went, because he would have new ideas about a given painting as he went along. It's a great story. We don't know whether it's true, but it's one of those stories. If it isn't true, it should be true. Okay, so this has been a tour through the Dove block as it exists now. We're at the very end of 2018. And our group, called the Dove Block Restoration Group, we are actually two groups, the Dove Block Restoration Group and the Arthur Dove Tribute Group. We have now made an agreement with a contractor to redevelop the building from essentially the ground up. It'll become interior, in the interior at least, a new building. So many of the things you've seen in this video will disappear. They'll be gone forever. As I mentioned earlier, we're hopeful of preserving much of Arthur's Wall and other artifacts that still have some historical interest. But we want you to remember this building as one of the great buildings of Geneva historically. And even though it will be in a new guise and it will have a wonderful new function in the city itself, this has been such an important building to the history of this city and American art. We wanted to have a final record of it as it looked before it was changed. Okay, Dave, be careful here, because this wonderful staircase, which we hope to preserve, but again, I don't think we're going to be able to, is semicircular, and it is off kilter from all these years of being in this position. This is the other staircase that leads to up and down through the third floor, so you can see why Arthur Dove was in. Everybody who visited him were in great shape while they lived here and he worked here. But the thing that we've had in mind, if you look at this space immediately behind me, we've had a fantasy that behind one of those there'll be an original Arthur Dove painting that got lost. If we find it, we'll be able to do whatever we like, because the last Arthur Dove painting sold for over $5.5 million in an auction at Christie's about 2 years ago. So a new Arthur Dove painting would be a wonderful thing. So far, we haven't found it.
There's me and the moon, and pretty soon there'll just be me.